Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Vantage Points. I'm Hisham al-Maligi. The convention of the Democratic Party officially nominated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be president and vice president in the 2020 elections. And it's expected that the GOP convention that is taking place right now will officially nominate Donald Trump and Pence to another term for the presidency and vice presidency. During the DNC convention, controversy erupted when a spokesman for the Biden campaign issued a statement basically distancing the campaign from our Muslim leader's sister, Linda Sarsour, and claiming that her views are not welcome and so much so forth. Of course, this firestorm erupted the question again between those who are trying to engage within the Democratic Party or within the American political spectrum in general, and those who are saying there is no point to do this, and this is the last straw or another big example of why Muslims should have their own way. Joining me today are three American Muslim leaders to discuss these issues and more, starting with Dr. Mohamad Elmasry, joining me from Doha. He is the media chair at the Qatar Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. From Los Angeles today, usually she's in San Francisco, Zahra Billoo is the executive director of CAIR-San Francisco. And also from California joining us is Cyrus McGoldrick. He is a PhD student in civilization studies in Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on short notice and looking forward to having a great discussion. Let's start with Dr. Mohamad. Your specialty is the media and how the media covers issues. Could you tell us how do you see the coverage of what happened from the campaign distancing itself from Linda Sarsour? The way it was covered, I see the right-wing media repeated it verbatim and, of course, twisted it in a way that it seems like we don't want to have anything to do with Linda and these views are bad and this and that, versus the other side. So I just want to leave it to you to tell me, how did you see this issue?
I mean, I haven't looked at it systematically. I hate to disappoint you, especially since I've been traveling over the last several days. But what I would say is that it hasn't received a ton of coverage in general, right? A lot of the coverage that we're seeing, a lot of the discussion that we're seeing is being generated by news outlets that focus on the Middle East or which are based in the Middle East. There's been quite a substantial amount of coverage on Al Jazeera, on the Middle East Eye, and outlets like that, the New Arab. But in the United States, it's to some extent has gone under the radar, and that's not surprising. First of all, Muslims are not covered very prominently unless, we know this from the research, unless there's some sort of an atrocity, a terrorist attack, something like that. I mean, it's usually in the context of something big and something negative. Also, this is, we can try to dismiss this as an aberration or exceptional, but the reality is that this is pretty consistent with mainstream American politics, not just the right wing or the GOP. I mean, this is coming out of the DNC. This is coming out of the Biden Harris campaign. This is not out of character, let's say, for the establishment Democrats, as far as I can tell. I mean, I was not particularly shocked by it. I was saddened by it. I was angered by it, but I wasn't surprised. And Linda Sarsour herself has not received favorable coverage in American media in general. if you do you don't have to do a systematic content analysis, but even if you just do a quick Google news search for Linda Sarsour, you're going to find that her name appears in the context of controversy and negativity. And really that shouldn't be the case, because she hasn't really done a whole lot that is particularly controversial. But the fact that she's Muslim and unapologetically Muslim and Palestinian, and she advocates for the Palestinian cause, is unfortunately something of a red line in American media circles and in American political circles.
Right. Thank you very much. Zahra, considering these issues, I mean, you know that I am not very fond of the two-party system, and I operate mostly from outside. But as a matter of fact, I'm an elected committeeman for the Democratic Party in my district. So my view of the involvement, and I want to get your view, that I have my principles and my moral standards as a Muslim, that I should not compromise it in order to play the game. As much as I am able to, I can participate, but at a certain limit, I have to stand my ground and refuse certain issues. How do you see the issue of Muslim involvement in politics, particularly within the Democratic Party apparatus?
Thanks so much, Hisham, for convening us for this conversation. I realize I probably should have had my lower third say Zahra Billoo in her personal capacity. So I'll mention that about anything I really say on this call. Hisham, I don't think that voting for a candidate, even if we have to hold our noses and bring our barf bags and drag ourselves to the voting booth on election day, or mail in if you're in California or other places where we'll have mail-in ballots, is a compromise on our principles. A compromise on our principles would imply that I'm saying this candidate is perfect, I love them, and once they're in office, I know I'm all done. I'm not protesting, I'm not writing, I'm not advocating, I'm not lobbying anymore. Unfortunately, there are no perfect candidates. Even among Muslims, we can't agree on perfect candidates. And so I don't think that it's a compromise at all. And you're not saying I'm going to play the game. You're saying I'm going to be strategic based on what is going on, what our options are. This is what I can do right now on election day. But if our civic engagement begins and ends on election day, then that's a bigger problem.
Thank you very much. And Cyrus McGoldrick, so what do you think about this issue, and whether or not, especially after this snub from the campaign, which we had issues with, with the campaign from the get-go, like the candidates' positions on, for example, the Iraq War, the crime bill of 1994, and so many other positions of Joe Biden himself over the years, and being Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years with all the drone bombing and the spying and this is that. How do you see this issue? How would you, if you are the arbiter, how would you choose to approach this issue?
This is too big a question for me right now. Honestly, I almost want to say different things to different groups of people, about this election. To be honest, Joe Biden he's a disaster. If we're comparing, trying to decide which of the two, whether him or Trump is the lesser of two evils, I don't think we could even take that question for granted. I think we would actually have to walk through position by position, different models, for what could happen, what the results might be. I am not so committed, to holding my nose and voting for one rather than the other. I think what I've learned from all of this, and talking about this case from this past week with, the Biden spokesman, and really insulting and distancing himself and Biden's campaign from Linda, our sister Linda. It reminded me also, of why I stepped away from a certain type of political work, which, I used to do, based in New York, and felt that it was more important to organize our own communities first before organizing into the parties, right? And when now we find ourselves in a position where, we've had activists who are organizing people directly into the political parties, organizing people into the Democratic clubs or the voter clubs, and sending people directly from the masjid straight out to go vote, without developing a mechanism by which our community can have a broader shura. We are limiting ourselves. We're limiting our ability to actually hold elected officials to the accountability that we are throwing out. We say that we're going to hold people accountable after electing them. I don't think we even have the mechanism in the Muslim community to be a meaningful part of that process either. Really, when you look at Malcolm's strategy in the ballot of the bullet, for example, he is talking about voting. He is talking about voter blocks. I'm not saying that we throw out voting or that we never vote, but he's talking about waiting. He's talking about waiting until a candidate comes and makes real promises, makes real commitments, and can demonstrate that he can follow through on those commitments before committing the voting bloc of the Muslims to that candidate. I don't think we've done that with the Biden campaign. I don't think we did that with Obama or any campaign for the last 19 years. I think that we should. I think that a lot of the political work, the lobbying for the mobilizing for the Democratic Party, a lot of it's been premature. Separate from local issues are a little bit different, but for this presidential campaign, I'm not confident, and I'm not sold. I'm not sold on Biden, and I need to hear that case made more effectively than it has been. But anyway, this is partly. I don't mean to be so philosophical about it, but this has just been part of the big questions that have held me back from certain types of work as I try to study and focus and redirect my energies elsewhere.
Thank you, Cyrus. So a small story, basically I was swept up by the Obama 2008 campaign. Hope and Change, the constitutional scholar, the professor, the editor of the Law Review, the well-spoken, the cultured, this and that, and of course, first African-American with a real chance of becoming president. It took about 2 years to realize that it is not the party of the president, it is not the color of the president, it is not the gender of the president, but it's the system, including the institution of the presidency, and how a person becomes the nominee of either side of the ruling, duopoly. So from then on, I've been calling for taking a step back as Muslim Americans and re-evaluate our involvement. So here's the question to all of you, starting with Dr. Mohamad. What should be the ground rules or the etiquettes of Muslim involvement in politics in the United States?
Good question. Probably a question that we should tackle at a convention or in some sort of an edited volume contributed to by many people. And that's just my way of saying that I don't really feel comfortable in stating what the dominant approach should be, because Muslims are not, they're not monolithic. And sometimes I'll put stuff out on social media and I'll get a lot of pushback, and I'll also get a lot of people who agree with me. And then some people will come in with a third or a fourth or a fifth perspective. So I think it's going to be a challenge. I think that already just in this, what we've been on for 10 minutes, we've already heard different perspectives, and they're all useful perspectives, at least for me as an observer. And I don't consider myself an expert or anything. I think Cyrus and Zahra have more expertise in this domain than I do. But Zahra makes a really good point about the fact that when you vote for somebody, you're not necessarily, gung-ho about that person. You're not philosophically or otherwise devoted to that person. You can still protest. You're being strategic. On the other hand, Cyrus makes a really good point as well about the long-term cost-benefit analysis, the harms and the benefits of voting one way or another. And I don't know that we've done that. Certainly not systematically as a Muslim community. We hear people shout out all of the evils of Donald Trump, and of course all we can do is agree with those people. He's been an awful president, not just for Muslims, but for many people, marginalized people. And we hear the people saying, well, Biden is also bad. And I think most Muslims agree that Biden has there are a lot of problematic areas. So then that begs the question, well, then what do we do? What should our approach be? Should we take a step back altogether? I think everybody agrees that there has to be some level of political involvement. I'm not seeing many Muslims saying that we should just be completely disengaged from American politics. I'm not hearing many people say that. But there is this big debate about voting, right? Voting as a bloc, voting at all, voting third party, Democrat, Republican. 20 years ago, we voted as a bloc for the most part for George Bush, and it turned out, I think, pretty disastrously for American Muslims. I think there's pretty much consensus on that. The overwhelming majority of Muslims voted for Barack Obama. You've already talked about some of the problematic areas of his tenure in office, right? The surveillance state, the drone bombings, domestically and in terms of foreign policy. And have we really asked ourselves these difficult questions about the long-term ramifications of a Democrat victory? That's what I'm grappling with. I mean, everybody's already made up their mind. I'm still undecided on what I'm going to do, in case anybody cares. I don't know why anybody would care. People always ask me, well, who are you going to vote for? I don't know why anybody cares who I would vote for, but I have not decided yet. I'm certainly not going to vote for Donald Trump, but I may vote for Joe Biden and bring, as I said on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, I may bring a vomit bucket with me into the voting booth. But I may not. I mean, I'm extremely turned off by Biden-Harris, and that's putting it lightly. And I don't think Muslims, with all due respect, have thought through the consequences. And I don't want to talk too long. There are other people on the show, but just one thing really quickly that I don't know that we've grappled with enough, and that is that if Biden and Harris do win, there is a decent chance that they are going to wage war, not against Donald Trump and the Republicans and the policies that they've pursued over the last 4 years only, but also against the younger progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And so what are the long-term consequences of that kind of a war actually is won by the establishment Democrats? And if Biden wins, in all likelihood, if you look at just statistics and probability theory, he'll end up being a 2-term president. So we're talking about 8 years of that, as opposed to 4 more years of obviously disaster in Donald Trump, but also 4 more years of political resistance, of organization, of more and more young people getting involved politically, of running for office, more and more racial minorities and religious minorities running for office, and then more protests, more media antagonism. This has been the most revolutionary moment in America in the last 50 years. I mean, since the end of the civil rights movement, and it's not even close. To be honest, if you look at just activism, protests, media coverage, and a number of other metrics. So I think I've already spoken too long, and I don't even remember what your question was, Hisham. I don't even know. I don't think I answered it. They trained me when I started doing TV interviews. They said, listen, you don't actually have to answer the guy's question or the gal's question. You just talk about whatever you want to talk about. So I think that's what I just did.
I was trained as well, and as most of us did, and you have 3 points to make regardless of the question. So I get you, but you did allude to the point. So Cyrus had mentioned earlier that there should be certain issues that we have to abide by before we subscribe or support a certain candidate. And taking it back to the original point, which is how should we as Muslim Americans participate in American politics? Let me give you another thing. So I'm an immigrant from Egypt. So I am Egyptian, I'm African, I'm Middle Eastern, I'm North African, I'm Arab, although there is doubt about this because they say now, or I discovered that the real Arabs are only from a certain tribe in Yemen. So I might be a fake Arab, but that's a different story. I lived all my life as an Arab, and this is very confusing right now. Anyway, and I am also an American. but I'm a Muslim. Which one of these identities come when I am voting or I am participating in American politics? In my view, I'm a Muslim first and foremost, whether I'm in Egypt, whether I'm on Mars, wherever I am, because there are certain morals and principles that I abide by. Can we, Cyrus, give our vote or our support defying some of our morals and principles as Muslims to a candidate like Joe Biden?
Yeah, no, good questions, and I appreciate your introduction to that, because I'm Irish, I'm Iranian, I'm American, I'm a resident, of Turkey. There are all of these identities are important, right? These are ties of kinship, these are ties of shared land, and that comes with it, perhaps a sense of love for each other, like a positive asabiya, perhaps, right? And these aren't bad things, right?
Mhm.
I have some concern for the people of Ireland, right? Some people for the people of Iran, for the people of America. Sure, why not? But none of those identities, in my opinion, come with ethics, right? The way that Islam is a full ethical system, right? Both in its generalities and in its specifics. And so when I approach politics, I've tried to, as much as possible. Of course, we all have our blind spots, that we try to work on. But as much as possible, I've tried to align my politics with what I learned from the Islamic tradition, from the Quran, from the prophetic practice, and from the tradition that our scholars have built since. And so as I approach, this election, for example, I try to approach it also as not only in American, and certainly not as only in Iranian, and what this election what the implications might be, for my family in Iran or for Ireland, if that were relevant. I really try to approach it as a Muslim and with a global perspective on Islam as well. I'm just as concerned for a Muslim, sitting in the mountains in Afghanistan who could be the next victim, right, of a missile sent, or Yemen or Somalia, as I am for a Muslim in America. And sometimes we privilege our own community, the American Muslim, what's best for the American Muslim. And I think that is a slippery slope into making compromises that throw our people under the bus. When I approach this election, if since the Trump's first election, even since 2016, I suggested, I tried to kind of do some of this analysis, tried to think through, what would be better for the Muslims in America and around the world. Would it be better for us, to have a Biden, in office who may continue much of what Obama did, maybe worse, or would it be better to have someone like Trump? At that time, for example, Trump was making certain statements, that seemed anti-war, that seemed isolationist. He was being criticized in the press, for seemingly not being enough of a war hawk, right? Often he's criticized for things, even though he's done almost everything that Obama did, of course. But this was, in the early period. I think, the choice now that we have between essentially a polite empire or an openly racist empire, right? This is the choice that we have now. Both are going to continue certain war policies. What if we strip those away? But the question that I ask myself, and we won't know until we're there, but one of the ways that I approach it, one of the etiquettes that I have, one of the ways that I approach an election like this is who's going to drop less bombs, who's going to kill less, who's going to result in the death of fewer Muslims or all humans, right? Every life being sacred. Who is going to result in less death? Things like economic policies. I obviously believe in universal healthcare. I obviously believe in universal education. All of these things should be the first priorities of the state. The huge amounts of taxes that the government takes from us, or the wealthier among us. Those taxes should be spent on good things. But my first priority is not letting that money be spent on killing people. Ending violence is more important to me, is a higher priority to me than all of the positive things that we hope that we build from there. So this is one of the questions that I bring to an election like this, for example. And I know that we're not, this is the problem, like Dr. Masri said, this is something that our community is not necessarily even agreed upon, right? We have factions in our community, right, that have sought to use American military power on their side in foreign conflicts, right? In conflicts inside the Muslim world. There are Muslim groups, they identify as Muslims, who are lobbying in Washington to get the U.S. military to intervene on their side, right, in foreign conflicts. This is something which is I'm appalled by, right? It's just something that I want to see no part of, and I think there's an Islamic lesson, that needs to be learned here. But this is one of the obstacles, for example, to unified organizing, right, towards a presidential election. Surveillance, these things are very basic. Just the war on terror is a war on Islam, right? And so we need to prioritize ending that war on us. And any candidate that's not pledging to end that war, right, is a suspect and should be held at a distance. And between the candidates, if they all seem to be on about the same page, then I want to weigh the pros and cons between the two of them. And in the meantime, if I should plug it now, you already mentioned it, Hisham, but the fact that anyone who does not live in a swing state is talking about voting for Joe Biden or Donald Trump for that matter, but no one's really admitting to voting for Donald Trump. But the fact that anyone who does not live in a swing state is talking about voting for Joe Biden it reflects a criminal misunderstanding of American politics and of the stakes. We absolutely need part of the reason that part of why this is such a huge problem, why we face this same mess every 4 years, right, is because there are two parties and because we're left with one or the other at the end of the day, right? I'm not sure that the Green Party is going to rise onto every ballot before the end of time. I'm not sure that the Libertarian Party is ever going to put up a decent presidential candidate, before Qiyamah. But at the very least, if you're going to vote, then that should be something that, is considered, right? And we're shooting ourselves in the foot every time. When I see people, with respect, when I see people in California or up in the Northeast, talking about voting for Joe Biden, I think, why? Why? This is the chance. These are the easy ones. Right. that we could finally try to boost these parties a little bit. And finally, last point is then still all of this is just philosophical to me. I really think that we need to organize ourselves first. We're still 5-10 years away from being a legitimate force in American politics. And there's the issue of effectiveness, and then there's also the issue of ethics, right? I'm not sure how long it's going to take us to be a good ethical force in American politics, but we're a little bit closer at least, but still down the road, but we're a little bit closer to being an effective one.
And thank you, Cyrus. And to clarify what you're saying, you, like, for example, voting in California and New York states, they are solid blue states. There is no chance in hell that Trump would win those states. And you're talking specifically about Muslim voters, not everybody.
Yeah, I don't imagine. I would not imagine, a huge walkout from Democrats in New York State, to vote for so many third party. There's going to be so many third party votes that all of a sudden Trump is going to come from behind, and take New York State and flip the whole election. You can blame me if that happens. That would be hilarious. If enough people watched our show today, that would be something I'd be happy to take credit for. But I don't think that's the risk, right? But at least if we're talking about making essentially what we're talking about with a presidential election, we're trying to make a principled choice, right? These are symbolic, voting for the presidential election. This is such a symbolic little gesture, right? We're not even talking about congressional seats and these lower ballot, issues. This is just, so if you're trying to make a choice, right, you're gonna spend that little bit of energy to flip that, switch, whatever. Then I would think about, including this in our calculus, because it's one of those things that long term, starts to make a difference. I think, as we see the Democrat Party just flying to the right, that's one of the huge risks here, right? The Democrat Party has been flying to the right, right? The Democratic Party platform today might be on many measures to the right of George W. Bush, right? And if we have time in the show today, I would love to, I know Dr. Elmasry didn't mean anything by it, but I think sometimes the 2000 election and the activists who are behind the 2000 election and endorsing Bush are beat up a lot by our generation. I think the history of that is really interesting, actually, and shows that they were organizing much more effectively than anything we've done since. There's a reason that they took down Dr. Samuel Etienne, and that was a lot to do with his success, right, in that election, in securing real concessions that were almost signed, until, of course, 9/11 happened. But I think that, well, anyway, there's so much there to get into. But I think there's a few pieces in motion here. Yeah.
We'll continue. So many pieces that you raised are very good points. And just a reminder that I myself was a candidate for the Libertarian Party for New York City Controller in 2013.
Right.
I was the first Arab immigrant Muslim to ever reach the general election in the history of New York State. And I took a whopping 5,000 votes out of the 750,000 votes that the winner got. So rest assured, America, Muslim vote will not make a dent in New York or in California.
Unfortunately.
But we try to project that we are much bigger than what we are anyway. It's part of the game. You have to play the game. So Zahra, question to you here, and I am really trying to get your sense of it. Cyrus mentioned the point that who would bomb less? Which one of the two likely winners would end up killing less people, and especially less Muslims, because Muslims get the brunt of the military power of the United States. So on that same line, do you think that Trump's rhetoric matches his action versus Barack Obama's? For example, like, is Trump really in action that bad comparing to what we experienced during the 8 years of Obama? How do we compare the two on issues rather than the rhetoric?
Yeah, so backtracking a second.
Sure.
That's a lot.
No, but I'm just like, Cyrus, like, I don't vote Democrat. Let's get that on the
Yeah,
record.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
Mohamad thinks no one cares how he votes, but I want to be really clear that unlike some of you all, I didn't vote for Obama. Yeah.
I know that about you, Zahra.
But we have to, right. No, but the listeners may not, right? And I'm like, wait a second. And that was also why I clarified that I was speaking in my personal capacity earlier. But in the age of the internet, Cyrus, like, we're not just talking to people in solid blue states, we're talking to people in swing states, right? And so what I've seen a lot of this week is people saying, so what are you saying? Should we vote for Trump? And I'm like, no. I'm saying I'm really grateful to be safe and secure in California, where I don't have to make that decision, and I can vote green as much as I want, as often as I want. Hisham, I don't know that, and thank you also for clarifying what happened with George Bush, because I do agree that the elders in that work are often misunderstood, but they were far more organized and far more effective than so much of what I have seen now. I mean, great, Joe Biden shows up and speaks at some Muslim webinar and then insults Muslims the next week, right? But in the case of George Bush, they actually got hard-won policy concessions, and those policy concessions made it into the debate. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. Hisham, I don't know. I don't know who would kill fewer Muslims, right? It's hard to compare Trump to Obama because Trump is continuing much of what Obama was already doing. Obama continued everything George W. Bush did, right? The only people that were prosecuted by the Obama administration in the context of the Bush administration were the whistleblowers. And so would Biden kill more or less people? Would Trump kill more people if he took a second term? And by the way, another concern that we haven't talked about is if he takes a second term, how do we know he's not going to fight for a third term? And that's something that we've heard spokespeople from his campaign talking about, right? And so and by the way, we don't even know that he's going to give up this first one if he loses. And so comparing Trump to Obama feels a bit premature. Comparing Biden to Trump or Obama is definitely terrifying, right? Biden served under Obama. Biden has worked really hard for Obama's endorsement. And actually, Azad Issa at Middle East Eye put up a great piece just recently about even Michelle Obama's remarks at the DNC and all of the war language that was embedded in it that we don't want to talk about because everybody loves Michelle Obama. And so it's a rock and a hard place, really. And the thing I was going to raise before you asked me to choose between bad and bad or the lesser of two evils was how much the down ballot matters. And so it's great that you've run for office and we've alluded to the down ballot, but that's really, if anything has kept us safe, of course, first and foremost, Allah in the last 4 years and always, but anything after that, it's been the down ballot, right? It's been the courageous members of Congress pushing back on the president, the state legislatures who've said, ICE can't come into our states, or if there's a Muslim registry that our state won't participate. And the list goes on in terms of what they've been doing. But this is something that I worry about when we spend so much time talking about Biden versus Trump, or the DNC versus the RNC, is we forget the down ballot. And so look, show up. If you're in a swing state, like pray istikhara. If you're in a solid blue state, vote your conscience, because you don't have to choose between the lesser of two evils, but vote the rest of the ballot, right? Everything down to the district attorney and the school board. That's going to impact our everyday lives, and be who protects us and pushes back against a bad president.
This is an excellent point, Zahra. Thank you very much for making it. The down ballot is way more important than the presidential election any year, because we have more impact on these races because of the lesser number of voters in each race, but also that they affect our day-to-day life. So my
Well,
New
and
York
Hisham, really quickly, also just, and that's who checks the powers, right? This
right.
is what we learned in grade school, is the checks and balances. And so, okay, fine. Like, we have a executive branch that is racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, misogynist, and incompetent, right? Not to mention violent and all of those other things. But what are we doing with the legislative branch and the judicial branch? And the Supreme Court
Right.
aside, the legislative branch in particular, and then lower level judicial seats that we vote on. That's who has to implement what the executive does and or restrict what the executive does.
Right, definitely. And like my city council election in New York City, which is basically the legislature of the city, is more important because it's the day to day. It affects my money more than even the federal government for many reasons. Dr. Mohamad, I know you have to leave us soon, but I want to ask you also, how do you see the performance of Trump in the past 3.5 years as president versus Obama? And let me preface by this. For example, yes, Zahra mentioned that Obama continued what Bush started, and Trump is continuing what Obama continued. But we know that Obama started new wars, expanded the surveillance, this and that. How do you see the performance of Trump in the past 3.5 years? Is it more rhetoric, hateful rhetoric, misogynist, Islamophobic, xenophobic, this and that, or it matched, like his act actually did match and created as much damage as the expanded wars and surveillance and other things that Obama expanded? And I promise you, I'm not coming at this because I'm trying to push voting for Trump. I cannot imagine that a sane Muslim would do it, but I want to be fair and look at the matter for its reality rather than lying to myself and make believe something that is not. So I'm going to give you the floor now.
Okay, you ask such juicy questions, Hisham, that
Thank you.
I feel like it's not fair to expect me to respond in only 2 or 3 minutes. First of all, can I just say that it's almost criminal that we're now, however long, 35 minutes into this, and you haven't asked anybody about Kanye West. I mean, you have 2 people sitting in California. They're like 20 minutes from Kanye right now, Cyrus and Zahra, and you haven't asked a single question. Here's the guy who said one of his lyrics was, I'm like a fly Malcolm X, by any genes necessary. We can't just toss that out of the window. We have to. I mean, that's a brilliant line. We have to give this guy
fair defense. That's really what I'm applying for.
So now what we know, though, is that Mohamad is voting for Kanye West. Thank you for letting us know.
So that was meant as a joke. So now I have to clarify that I am absolutely not voting for Kanye West. And I do not encourage anybody to vote for Kanye West. I actually got accused, I think rightfully, because I was on social media, I'd kind of made fun of Kanye. I was kind of cracking these jokes. And then somebody came at me and was like, listen, I think he's not mentally well. Like he's actually suffering from some mental illnesses. Right. And I think that's a fair point. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or whatever, but so we probably have to ease up a little bit on Kanye. But anyways, I also want, before I answer your question, and I will answer your question, inshallah, but this whole issue of who's going to kill more people or kill more Muslims or whatever. A couple of things on that. First of all, historically, if we're thinking about foreign policy, historically, there is very little difference between Democrat presidents and Republican presidents in terms of foreign policy and in terms of war and violence and these types of things. And this is borne out through you can look at, there are a lot of political scientists, international relations scholars who've examined that pretty systematically. It's one of the reasons why someone like Noam Chomsky, who I disagree with Chomsky, particularly more recently on some of his views on the Middle East and other things, but I think he's been right more times than he's been wrong on American presidents and his analyses of American foreign policy. And one of the things that he's said repeatedly for 50 years is that there's very little difference between Democrats and Republicans on foreign policy issues. And it's one of the reasons why he almost never votes during the presidential election. Mm-hmm. Now, to be fair, I have to acknowledge that Chomsky is now encouraging people to vote for Joe Biden, as far as I understand, and he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So, and then the other thing about killing people, are we talking about bombings? Are we talking about bombing Muslim countries? Or are we talking about other forms of slow death? Because that has to be factored in as well. Right. You know, the healthcare crisis in the United States is obviously it's a human rights disaster, a catastrophe. You have people literally, chronically ill who cannot go to the doctor, who cannot receive treatment, and who die of preventable diseases. So, and that's just one example. We haven't even talked about the southern border and myriad other issues. So I think we have to problematize that discussion a little bit. It's not just about, who's going to bomb more people. Now, your question was about Trump versus Obama. Oh boy. I mean, it bothers me when people, and this is just my, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. Look, to each his own. Everybody has the right to his or her opinion. But it does bother me when people sort of reflect favorably or nostalgically about the Obama years, because I thought it was just, personally, I thought the Obama years were disastrous in almost every respect. Yes. And this is one of the reasons why, for me personally, for Mohamad Elmasry, this is why I am hesitant to lend my vote to the Democrats in particular, because I feel like politics in the United States are so polarizing and they're so ideological that it is almost impossible for people who consider themselves leftists or Democrats or whatever to fairly, adequately, honestly assess a Democrat president. There are just very few people that will be willing to do that. And so you have people quite literally celebrating the Obama years. I was pleased to hear or watch a short video that Ice Cube, speaking of California, put on Instagram, I think yesterday, I saw it this morning, about, he basically was saying he was addressing Black Americans, but he was saying we have to hold Democrats accountable because they haven't delivered on the kinds of things that we've asked them to deliver on. So it's fine if you want to campaign for Joe Biden, but how are you going to then hold him to account after he wins, if he wins? But the Obama years were disastrous. The Trump years have been disastrous, Hisham. I mean, I don't know how to answer your question. We'd have to literally go through point by point, issue by issue, policy by policy, and try to come up with some sort of a formula. Maybe somebody has done that, but they've both been pretty disastrous. Certainly, Obama is more articulate. He's more proper. He's more polite. He's better mannered. He's more intelligent. There's no question about any of that. So does he represent the United States better and more effectively than Trump? Sure. How much should that count in our calculation? I don't know. Trump has no filter. He's rough. He's explicitly racist. He's explicitly bigoted. And there's obviously part of that is deeply problematic, to say it lightly. But there's also a part of me, again, and I'm not asking anybody to agree with me, but there's also part of me that likes to know when somebody hates me, when somebody dislikes me, rather than being lulled to sleep by somebody who constantly tells me that they're with me, who constantly tells me that they love me, but who's always then stabbing me in the back and spitting on me when I'm not looking. And that's one of the things that Malcolm X was talking about in the, during the lead up to the 1964 Barry Goldwater election. He said, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Barry Goldwater won, even though this man was explicitly anti-black. He was a racist. He was a bigot. He was saying this might wake black people up. He's not capable of concealing his bigotry and his racism. And so it might spur more of a revolutionary zeal, more political participation and involvement. As bad as the Trump years have been, I think we can all agree that one consequence has been this increased level of activism and political consciousness among large groups of Americans. That's something positive. To what extent it will carry forward, I don't know. And I can't even see right now the way the camera you have it. I can't see if Zahra and Cyrus are agreeing with me, or if they want to punch me or what. And I have to apologize because I have to cut out. I will watch this back, but I have to cut out because I have another meeting coming up, and I haven't eaten dinner, and I have to pray Maghrib, and so I'm sorry. But it was really good being with all of you, Zahra, Cyrus. Thank you so much for having me, Hisham, and we'll do it again, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohamad, Chair of the Media Studies at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies, joining us from Doha. He has to go for another commitment. Looking forward to having you again soon. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, the two of you now have to battle, as what Dr. Mohamad just raised, which is someone is smiling in my face and stabbing me in the back, and someone is holding the knife straight in my face. Which one do I choose, or just reject both, or the compromise that we came up? If you're not in a swing state, reject both. If you're in a swing state, pray istikhara and go. So
no, but that's right. I mean, I think I would agree with what Dr. Mohamad said in terms of the difference between the parties, is that one of the, I don't want this to be mistaken as a favorable comment about Trump, but one of the silver linings of the last 3.5 years is that he has unveiled what is foundational in the United States. The misogyny, the racism, the Islamophobia, the warmongering, all of it is who this country is. It is who we have been since its founding. It is something that our tax dollars pay for. So we're also all complicit in, except, I don't know, I guess if you live abroad, maybe you get to pay less taxes than the rest of us, right? But like, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to get you in trouble with the IRS, but this has been, in some ways, what's been refreshing about the Trump administration, similar to, by the way, what we saw a lot of during Bush's second term, was this realization of like, oh, this is really us. This is who we are. This is what continues to drive American politics and policy. And so for me, the difference between Obama and Trump is, they're both going to kill you. It's just who's going to do it nicely.
Nicely.
Gently, without you knowing it's coming, right? Like, as opposed to so Obama is gonna tell you he's your friend, he's gonna invite you over for iftar, he's going to talk about how Muslims are an important part of America, and then he's gonna stab you in the back, and he'll do it right there while you're sitting at dinner, unable to move. Cyrus and I think really bonded back then when we would critique Muslims, right? Who would sit at iftar as the Obama administration, as President Obama himself would justify the force feeding they were force feeding Muslims at Guantanamo and then feeding them fancy iftars at the White House, right? And while they were feeding them the fancy iftars at the White House, they were justifying apartheid Israel's violence against Palestinians.
Right.
And so that's how
having the ambassador,
the Obama administration. Right. But with the Trump administration, he's coming at you. Like, he's not inviting you to iftar. He's going to find your house. He's going to stumble and fumble on his way to stab you in the face. But you will see it coming. And so maybe you'll organize better and differently. Maybe.
Cyrus?
Yeah, it's like Malcolm said, it's the wolf and the fox, right? The wolf shows you his teeth, and you know he's going to bite you. The fox shows you his teeth, and you think he's smiling, right? And Malcolm said then that I prefer the wolf, but again, that's that's a choice. I in 2016, it was as a joke. It was ironically, I started a page called Muslims for Trump, and my point was only right that I would much rather have I'd much rather pull the face off of this, the mask off of this empire. I found it much more useful, and I was right about some things, maybe wrong about others. I think as Dr. Mohamad said that like this year, look at this year alone. Look at these last few months alone, right? Of Black liberation protests, right? Of uprising, right? I don't think this would have happened, right? If Hillary Clinton were the president, not to this extent. I don't think that it would have happened to this extent, even if Bernie Sanders were the Democratic candidate waiting, for the election. I don't think it would have happened. I think there was a lot of radical energy that had been, blocked, that had to be redirected into a protest movement. And when you look at the results of that, I mean, the results, when you look at the surveys, I saw crazy numbers, right, about the impact of these protests on popular American consciousness, even among white people, about police brutality, right, and racism in the United States, right? So quickly, within months, right, numbers just flipped to the point that I want to say, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was almost the majority of Americans now accept, right, that racism is a part of police brutality, or that there's a racist element to police brutality, right? Of course, it's obvious to us, we should roll our eyes, but the fact that it could this quickly, ideas could change that quickly is a sign that protests, honestly, works better than all the educational campaigns and all the foundation dollars that have been spent on this. Although, of course, that they're connected. I really, I laugh sometimes. I when I watch Trump, The Onion had an article that they published years ago. I remember the headline. I share it as often as possible. The headline was something like Al-Qaeda, FBI uncovers Al-Qaeda plot to sit back and watch the collapse of the U.S., or something like this,
yes,
right?
I remember that one.
That America's going to destroy itself, basically.
Right.
And I think that there's some truth to this. And I also, I remember this sometimes, when I see liberal elites criticizing Trump for undermining American power in the world, right? There's been an expectation over decades, right, that the United States is the police of the world, is the leadership, the pole, right, of the world, right? And Trump is the first president, as Dr. Mohamad was correct, right? There's very little difference, right? But I think Trump's instincts, are the first, right, in the presidency in many, many years to go against this trend, right? He's more of an isolationist for terrible reasons, mind you, right? This is not because he's some principled, anti-imperialist or pacifist, by no means, right? It is very much related to, domestic fascism. It's very much related to pivoting to China, right? You have to study Steve Bannon, right, to get a better sense of what some of the thoughts that are rattling around inside Trump's head. But that a lot of it has to do with changing our focus and putting America first. Now, that could be worse for Muslims at home, right? Because it could lead to a much more controlling domestic sphere. That would have to be discussed. But it could be better overseas. It's hard to tell. Sometimes he'll say something, right? And then the Pentagon officials will come out in the next press conference and say, well, Trump didn't really mean that. He didn't. We're actually going to keep our troops in Afghanistan. Don't worry. Right.
But on this point, Cyrus, if I may, I remember Bill Clinton having a press conference in Cairo after a tour in the Middle East. And it was right after the war in Bosnia. And Clinton, or the administration at the time, was talking about returning the refugees, the Bosnian refugees, back home. So one of the Egyptian journalists, it wasn't called International, this is during the time of Mubarak, of course. So a huge international press conference with 300 Egyptian journalists, no foreign journalists.
Wow.
That's just about the dictatorship at the time and now. But anyway, so one smart head of a think tank asked a question to Bill Clinton. You mentioned that you want to return the refugees back to Bosnia, and this is a very commendable thing. And he led them very slowly. And then at the end, he said, would you think this is a good thing to do for Palestinians as well? And Bill Clinton sweated and laughed and coughed and took a minute, and then he said yes. Basically, he said yes. And the next day, the State Department issued a statement. No, he didn't mean it that way, blah, blah, blah. So this is a standard operational procedure in different administrations. Apologies for interrupting, but I wanted to make this point
No.
because there is no difference. After everything is said and done, it's the same effect on the ground.
Yeah. I think so. I think often that's true. I remember in 2016, of course, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, had published an op-ed, suggesting people vote for Clinton. And his main angle, if I remember correctly, it's been some years, was about the judges, right? A lot of it had to do with the judges, that a Democratic president would be more likely to appoint, right? And the impact, especially, of course, he has a place in his heart for political prisoners and for the most difficult cases, right, of the war on terror, the political prosecutions and others. And he felt that, and he had some experience with these, that he felt that Democratic appointed judges were going to be better, right, on some of these issues than Republican appointed judges. I think that's fair. That's a calculation that we have to make. I'm not throwing away this whole thing. I obviously have a certain disappointment, and I have a certain grudge, against Democrats, and there's a certain there's a partly malevolent, side to me that loves seeing Trump just destroy the American image around the world. Like I can't pretend that to see this happening in real time, just day by day, just another firestorm after firestorm, right? That Trump bringing upon himself in the country. It's hard to be mad at it. It's ugly. I'm of course extremely concerned about my many loved ones who live here, right? Who have chosen to live here and to stay here. But I wonder if it's not part of an arc, right, towards something better. I don't know, right? I think a second term of Trump might finally, bring a revolution to the streets of America, like even more than we saw this year, right? In a way that, like you mentioned with Bush's second term,
right?
With Bush's second term, I was in college, in Bush's second term, but New York, it felt like the 60s. Like it felt like, we were going to take this thing down. Right. And it turns out, I remember finding out years later that the CIA knew this. I remember Glenn Greenwald talking about a CIA document that had been released in the years in between, right, that they knew themselves that Obama had to win, right? Because if Obama didn't win, then the anti-war movement could spill over, like that energy could spill over, right, into something that they couldn't control anymore. We need to blow off steam, let each side blow off steam. This is partly the logic of the parties trading back and forth.
Right.
I'd kind of like to see that steam blow up a little bit more, and this year is a good sign of it, right? This is a good start, but obviously you can only really get a month out of, protests like that. And then, but we'll see, we'll see where it goes from here.
But I mean, your sentiment is not in any way malicious, because you just want some things to become better, and it might not become better unless it becomes worse.
That's right. I think so.
So Zahra, in the remaining 2 minutes, please summarize this hour and advise the Muslim voter in swing states and non-swing states. Take it away.
In your personal capacity, of course. Yeah.
In your personal capacity.
In my personal capacity, Dr. Elmasry talked about a barf bucket. I think you just need a barf bag. So hold your nose, get the barf bag, and plan to vote, right? Like, praise the CAIR about the really hard ones. I do think that it's important that as much as we talk among ourselves, as much as we consult with the experts and the videos, that we also consult with God, because in the end, that decision is one that should be driven by our religious ethics, and is one that we're personally held accountable for, right? So consult with God and then vote. We do need you to vote, and we need you to vote all the way down the ballot, right? So that everyone that comes into office, you had something to do with. This is not, I am going to try to marry that man. And even when people enter marriages, you don't agree 110% on everything. Marriages are about compromise and about learning together and about constant work. So that's what this is, right? Is show up, vote for whoever you can stomach voting for, and then keep working. And this is the other thing, right? Is that we see these conversations reach a peak, even in our community, in election years. But let's say the guy that we like a little bit more than the other one, and like is a very generous term here, wins, right? I'm sorry, Cyrus, that we can tolerate or stomach a little more than the other one. And I just mean like a tiny bit more. And this is, again, the presidency and all of the other races. The work has to continue the day after. Because this is like, if we were to, like, we've talked a lot about who killed more people and what the organizing looked like, et cetera, right? At the end of Bush's second term, Obama comes in, everybody celebrates, everybody breathes a sigh of relief, and all of the resistance energy goes away, right? Like if Trump or Bush, by the way, had done what Obama was doing, assassinating US citizens abroad, going back on his promise to close Guantanamo, expanding the surveillance state, deporting more people than anyone before him, and so many other things, we would have seen revolutionary energy, but we didn't see it under Obama. And so no matter who wins, arguably the most important day is the day after the election.
Right. Well, I want to thank you.
Can I add one
Sure.
last thing?
Go ahead, Cyrus.
You just made me think. It's one thing that we've been missing here, just a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Aside from the voting, right? I think there's an internal process also that these election seasons allow us to address, right? And we've seen it over the last few weeks, and I guess the Muslim internet perhaps goes through it every few weeks. But just as we choose or try to, throw our vote into choosing who are the leaders of our political entity that we reside in, I think we also need to be careful about the leaders that we choose inside our Muslim communities, right? The leaders that we choose and send, right, to represent us, right? And of course, we don't always choose them. A lot of our organizing is done through nonprofit organizations who are selected by boards who are, so there's a process. Maybe it goes through money or votes. Or, there's different ways that we can go about this. But I think we need to be careful. I think, and this isn't, I know usually, we all because Linda's the furthest in the front. She's in most of the mainstream media. Sometimes our disagreements with her, are mostly just about priorities and the order of things, right? It's. I don't attribute any ill will to her by any means, right? But then there are other organizations, right, who are able to plant themselves in the front of a lot of our political work, especially in the Democratic Party, who are much more concerning, honestly. Like this stuff with Biden just exposes also the role of groups like Engage, these groups, like new groups who come up, with a lot of money, with Zionist connections, right, who have a history of their people supporting American war efforts around the world. And if Biden gets elected, all that statement said to me this past week, with them distancing themselves from Linda, all that says to me is that, trust me, Linda has no cabinet position, but we're going to put some of these Engage people, right, in the seats, right? And now if your problem with Linda, right, is that she's, is Linda still talking about a two-state solution? Like, this isn't even that radical in terms of Palestine organizing, right? That, you're going to put these, that the good Muslims, right, that worries me a ton, right? And I think we need to, it really, honestly, I never thought of Engage as a serious group, for example, a year ago. If you asked me about them a year ago, right? There was a small Florida operation from what I understood. I think they had a name change somewhere along the way over the last few years. I think it was different. It was called something else, and then it became this. And all of a sudden, they're able to get Joe Biden on a webinar. And in response to that, because he calls into a Zoom call for a few minutes and quotes a hadith, right, that now we're going to get him 1 million votes, right? That right there, right, is a sign to me that the people who are leading or shepherding, right, a lot of our political work are of huge concern, right, And this is a bigger part of the problem. This is why this is partly why I left the United States. This is partly why I left this type of political organizing. I'm not really interested in telling people who to vote for right now. I think we have such huge problems internal to our community, right, that we need to solve some of these things first. And I think that will then solve or make it easier to solve a lot of the bigger political issues that we face in America around the world.
And I remember in 2016, Engage endorsed Hillary Clinton, and I had a very visceral reaction. And I said, no, you need to take yourself more seriously. You are going to probably give her a few states, which might give her the presidency.
Sure.
And therefore, what is the agreement?
On what basis? Yeah. Muslims do it. Literally, Muslims live in the swing states. That could really do it. Like Muslims could,
right.
I believe in this strategy. Muslims absolutely could swing an election, right? But we're giving it away. We're giving it away every single time.
Exactly.
In 2016, I said, who the hell is Engage?
So I know I said I was on my personal capacity, but I do work with a large Muslim organization, and here we are trashing another one. So I want to step in here and offer, but Cyrus, Cyrus, you said this, but I also want to state it for just so that we can repeat it, is that we have to engage our organizations, right? Our organizations are driven by us, they're held accountable by us, and we've seen, for what it's worth, we have seen some progress at Engage. So after the MLI issues, after the ADL issues, they are really clear that their current and new staff and board, not to mention the ones that have already done it, can't do some of what they were getting in trouble for doing. It's not revolutionary, but it's progress, and it came because of community pressure, right? Granted, their engagement with the American Jewish Congress is now something that like some of us are raising. So I'm not, again, we're not out of the woods with Engage, but we're seeing some progress because we push them, right? Because, hey, if they're stepping to the front, we need to make sure that we are holding them accountable. I don't understand that they have promised 1 million Muslim votes to Biden, because I'm not one of those votes, right? And I'm someone that is involved in the million Muslim vote project. But I just, and I know you're saying this, and I'm agreeing with you, is that we have to think about how we hold our local Muslim organizations accountable too, because you're right, like that's who steps up to the front, that's who gets us in trouble, and whether we like what happened in 2000 or not, right? It is our Muslim leaders that put us there. And I think you and I agree that like there was a strategy and that made sense. I'm sure someone would step up and say, hey, what is happening with the Biden campaign makes sense. We can push them. We can push them really hard. And, you know, though these organizations, the CAIR included, are not membership based, right? We vote with our money as community members. And I think that that's really, really huge and has been so important to us at CAIR. And is I think important to every grassroots Muslim organization, is to say, look, like our work is driven by the Muslim community that engages with us, works with us, and by the way, funds us, right? And so let's apply everything we're saying about the DNC to our
this is an important,
we agree on that,
this is an important topic to tackle in the next episode, holding ourselves first and our organizations accountable. I am positive that Cyrus, and I know that myself, we were not trashing per se, but we were just trying to make the point.
And so we've got to be careful.
Right. And thank you for
clear.
Last week,
Right. No, thank you. I appreciate it. This has been an awesome discussion. We're already 6 minutes over. I don't want to overburden the viewers, but I invite you, inshallah, to future episodes to discuss more of these issues. Zahra Billoo, Executive Director of CAIR San Francisco, joining us in her personal capacity, and Cyrus McGoldrick, PhD student in Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes this episode from Vantage Points. There are hashtags and there is a hashtag. This is the hashtag. Take care, America.
Okay.